Well, hello, everybody. We are extremely blessed today to have with us Terry Schilling, who's the president of the American Principles Project. Now, he spent a huge part of his career working in public policy, electoral politics, ways of protecting the American family and the American way of life. And he has some political experience in that he managed his father's congressional campaign in 2010 in Western Illinois, and they won by over 10 points in an area that historically had been entrenched as a Democratic stronghold. So I think he knows what he's doing. I think he knows what he's talking about. He's pioneering new ways to get voters interested in the real issues. And his work has been featured in many publications and broadcast media, CNN, Fox, USA Today, New York Times, Newsweek, Politico, etc. And he's a graduate of Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, the eldest of 10 children. So he does know a little bit about family. And he lives in Virginia with his wife, Katie, and their 5 children. So we are absolutely delighted to have Terry with us this morning. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that got you interested in doing this and the state of America today. And potentially some of the things that we might be able to do to get ourselves back. You know, there's so many people who are concerned about what's happening to our nation. In most cases, I think if you tried to describe today's America to people 20 years ago, they would have said, "Oh, get out of here. There's no way that would be happening in America." And yet it is happening. And we need to understand the root causes of the things that are happening so that we can address them. So take it away, Terry.
well, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Carson. I've been a big fan of yours for the longest time. I think you're a role model for so many Americans, especially my children. You are really the American dream, someone that came out of poverty, had a strong mother, and reached the pinnacle of success, and that really is the American dream. And I think all I do is, it's just very simple. I empower parents, I empower families, and we work to educate Americans about how important the American family is to society. This is something that was common sense and it was conventional wisdom just about 10 years ago. But over the course of time and as our culture has eroded, we've forgotten just how important the family is. And I also think that there's something to the family being the most important building block of society, almost getting turned into a cliche, something that's just been repeated and people just taking it for granted. But what we've seen over the past few years is a complete destruction of the American family. And it's much different than the attacks on the family that we saw in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, which was primarily divorce and broken homes and out of wedlock births. Today, we suffer from a much bigger problem, which is a lack of family formation. People aren't getting married, and when they do, they're getting married later. And even then, when they do get married later, they aren't having that many children, if having children at all. We have our priorities backwards in America. And that's
it's very interesting because families sort of reflect the whole nation. They are the cornerstone, the building block of a nation. And when you look at a nation, their history is so important to their identity, and their identity is so important to their beliefs. And that's exactly the same thing that happens with a child who's growing up. Having a family that they know the history of that family, they understand the beliefs of that family because those are things that they hear about all the time, and that gives them their identity. When they don't have that, they're like drifting in the wind, and they encounter negative influences out in the world, and they're easily engulfed by those negative influences. And particularly on the social media front, we leave people as that as their family, as that as their belief giver, and you see the results of it in our society today.
It's you're right. It's very toxic. There's a community around a non-community. And as we have fallen away from the family, we've actually seen our local communities and our local civic institutions completely collapse. We used to, as Americans, take pride in our local organization, our local sports leagues, our Moose Lodge, our Kiwanis Club, all of that. And that's all gone by the wayside as more Americans have moved to big cities, and we've almost centralized everything to being online. If you look at this, just look at families today. So there was an expose in the New York Times that was written in the 1970s. There was a reporter who embedded himself inside the Soviet Union. He wanted to compare the lives of women in the United States versus women in the Soviet Union. And what he found was that women in the Soviet Union, they weren't allowed to raise their own children. As soon as your baby turned 3, they had to go to a state-funded daycare. And then the women would go back to the workforce. And he explained to these Soviet women, which is, by the way, a huge communist country for those of your viewers that are younger, like younger than me anyway. He explained to them, women in America and families in America, they can live off of one income. And typically the moms stay home and they take care of the kids, and then they get involved in all these civic institutions outside of that. And the Soviets, the communist women, they kind of insulted the American women. They looked down on them. They said things like, oh, don't those American women want to participate in their economy? Don't they want to help out and serve their country? And you look at America today, and we've almost adopted the same mindset, where we value our careers, we put our education and our careers ahead of our family. And I think that if we're going to turn things around in this country, we've got to go back and start prioritizing the real things that matter, which is our family, our God, and our country, and not necessarily in that order, obviously. But
yeah, that is so incredibly important, because the role of each member of the family is important. And whether the mother is the guardian of the home, or whether the father is the guardian of the home, you need somebody to sort of be the guardian of the home. You need somebody to be the breadwinner. It can be the mother, it can be the father. But understanding those roles, because it's so important that the children have appropriate oversight and guidance. Children are vessels with enormous amounts of potential to do good or to do harm. It really kind of depends on those parents. We saw that recently in the case in Michigan, the Crumley case. Yeah. Obviously, this was a young man who was not getting appropriate guidance from his parents. One of the emails from his mom said, you got to do better at not getting caught. Believe me, that's probably not the right message. Mm-hmm. And if you're telling your kids that they can do things that perhaps are not the right things, but just don't get caught, what kind of individuals are those going to grow up to be? And, when you're at the dinner table, hopefully you are at the dinner table. There's so many families where everybody just fend for themselves. But that's a perfect time, to really bond with the children, to give them a sense of what your family values are, to let them explore with guidance, the various things that they hear each day, because they need somebody to bounce these things off of. And you can't be too busy for your children. That's probably the most important job that you potentially have. And they need to hear this constantly, because they're hearing the other side constantly. And they can't just hear from you once and you say, I told them, okay, my job is done. Because that's
right.
side is doing. They need to hear constantly what the right things are, what your values are, where you intend to go. And I'll just give you an example of how repetition is so good. You know, when I was a first year medical student, I was having a difficult time. And then, you know, I discovered the importance of repetition.
Mhm,
And I made all these flashcards.
mhm.
And I was carrying them around with me all the time. When I had 5 minutes, out would come my flashcards. My second year in medical school, I was living with my brother. He was in the School of Engineering. And he even knew all the bacteria and what they were sensitive to, because I always had these cards. And, you know, repetition is a very important thing, and consistency, you know, when we're teaching our children.
I was actually just having this conversation with my daughter Reagan this morning. She's 10 years old and she's been struggling with Spanish. And you know, I was telling her, I said, it's all about repetition. You test yourself and then you repeat again, you repeat again. And then I was explaining to her that when you learn something, that your brain actually makes a wrinkle. You're exactly right. And you know, I get this question a lot from parents. You know, we see these parents across the country that are showing up to these school board meetings and they're upset about various issues at the schools. It's the masks, it's the critical race theory stuff, the transgender stuff. And they ask me, what, I can't afford to send my kids to private school. What would you recommend I do? And I tell them, you have to go on offense. You have to talk to your kids. You have to argue with them. You have to debate them. You have to teach them just constantly. And I tell them, you know, the dinner table's great, but also I think it's really important. You know, I have 5 kids myself. So what I always try and do, we have these conversations at the dinner table, but I always try and get that one-on-one time with each of the kids. And it could be something short, like it could be a 5-minute trip to 7-Eleven to get Slurpees or something like that, or to McDonald's. And you have these conversations, and that alone time not only gives you time to teach them lessons and you know, embed values into them, but it also gives them a chance to tell you about what's going on in their lives so that you
Yeah,
can better help them. But it's all about having a real relationship and a real conversation with your kids. And these parents who, unfortunately, we've created an economy that requires both parents to work today. A lot of times when both parents are forced to work, they miss out on that one-on-one time. They miss out on that family time. And that's the biggest cost to this 2-income trap that we've created in
right.
America.
So, sometimes it's better to maybe drive a Chevrolet instead of a Mercedes and spend that time with your kids.
That's right.
It makes, but you know, when I was a kid, you know, we frequently did not have a lot of time with my mother because she was working 3 jobs at a time. She would leave at 5 in the morning and get home after midnight. Sometimes we didn't even see her all week except on the weekends. But when we did see her, we spent a lot of time together. She did everything she possibly could to give us that advantage in life, because she wanted us to be successful. And she got so much criticism.
Mm-hmm.
People were saying, you can't make boys stay in the house and read books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you. And I would overhear them and I would say, you know, they're right, Mother. But she said, no, you still got to do it. And I think she had the last laugh because one son became a brain surgeon and one became a rocket scientist. So
Yeah, she definitely did. You know, Dr. Carson, one question, I know you're going to be asking me a lot of questions, but one question I had for you, this came up last week. I don't know if you saw this, but Ben Affleck was getting grief in one of these, you know, popular magazine, pop culture magazines. He was getting flack because he had the audacity to say that, you know, having 2 parents and having a father involved in a kid's life is really important for the kids. And the reporter that did the story was attacking him for that. I wonder what your reaction would be, or what you would guess your mother's reaction would be to someone that is attacking someone for talking about the importance of fathers. Because I imagine, you know, in an ideal world, your mom would have loved to have had the extra help and would have been better off not having to work so much.
no question. But, you know, she constantly told both me and my brother, she would point to examples of people who were doing inappropriate things and bad things. And and trying to make sure that we became good fathers and responsible fathers. But, as far as the affluent thing is concerned, my answer to those kinds of things is the facts. Let's put the facts in the middle of the table and then discuss it. And there have been many sociological studies that have demonstrated that the two-parent nuclear family has much better outcomes. But it's not even close. It's not even controversial. So put the facts on the table and let's talk about it in light of what we know. And then, you look at things like poverty. There was a huge study that was done on poverty by the Brookings Institute, and that tends to be a left-leaning institute, on poverty. And they concluded that there were a few things that a person could do that would reduce the likelihood of them living in poverty to 2 to 3% or less. And those things were, number one, finish high school, the importance of a basic education. Number two, get married. Again, the importance of family. Number three, wait until you're married to have children. Utilize that brain, think, plan, organize. And number four, get a job. Now,
seems pretty common sense.
We used to know that stuff. Now it's a big revelation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What's happening to us? Yeah. But it's all good. Now, I'm sure you were paying pretty close attention to what happened in Virginia. And obviously, a lot of people crossed political lines to make that happen. What do you think was the driving force there?
Well, I think ultimately, the driving force in this most recent election was families, and specifically parents who felt that they were under attack, they weren't being listened to. In fact, they were being told to sit down and shut up and being investigated as domestic terrorists. This was a huge confluence of events. I mean, if you look at the state of I think this was a reflection of the state of the family, and it was a backlash based on what's happening to our kids. I have 5 kids, right? So you look at what my kids have to go through. They go to schools where, well, not anymore, but the public schools teach our kids that America is evil, fundamentally rotten from the time of our founding, which wasn't in 1776, apparently, it was 1619. They tell our kids that their parents are bigots and that they're racist if they're white. They tell our kids that they can change their gender at any moment. They encourage free sex in middle school and in high schools. They have pornographic material in our kids' libraries.
It's really child abuse, isn't it?
It really is. If you look at the state of the public education system, it actually is child abuse. I actually gave a speech at one of the local churches here in Northern Virginia where I talked about why I personally pulled my kids out of public schools. And I said I pulled them out because it's child abuse to send your kids to Fairfax County Public Schools. And that is probably an understatement, because what these teachers and what these schools know that a lot of parents are just now figuring out is that these schools and these teachers are in a position of authority. So when children hear them say things, when they hear them say that America is evil or that their parents are racist and bigoted and backwards, they're coming from a position of authority, and the children are then having to choose between their country and their teacher, their country and their parents and their schools. And we have to start doing everything we can to get back control of our public education system. I have a lot of friends who want to basically defund public education, and I'm fine doing certain punitive measures in the short term, but we have to have a public education system, and not just a public education system. We have to have a robust and a truthful and a good public education system, because people need to get educated, and not everyone can afford public or private schools. So we've got to turn this thing around. These people are taking our money, by the way.
That was one of the things that Alexis de Tocqueville noted when he did his intense study on America, of how much we valued education. And a person back in the 1800s who finished 6th grade was pretty well educated. You take a look at one of those 6th grade exit exams.
Yep.
I doubt that most people today could even pass the thing. And, it really is embarrassing, but it's also very dangerous that we have so many people who are ignorant. Sometimes when you see those man on the street interviews and they're asking who were the opponents in the Civil War, and they're like, England.
Yeah.
I mean, they have no idea what's going on, and they become very easy people to manipulate. And
That's exactly right.
That's why, what you're doing with APP, what we're doing with American Cornerstone is educating people, getting them to the real facts. Some of the people in the 1619 Project and critical race theory advocates, they want people to believe that there's something unique about America because we had slavery. They don't tell the whole story, that slavery has been a part of human civilizations since we have had history. And, there's nothing unique about exploiting other people. It's not a good thing. There's no question about that. But, we were involved in it as many others were. The only thing that is unique is that we had so many people who were opposed to it that we were willing to fight a civil war and lose a large portion of our population to get rid of such an evil institution. And that's what we need to teach our children.
No, I think that's exactly right, Dr. Carson. And I have a friend of mine who he gets really fired up about this stuff. And he says, we didn't start slavery, we ended it. We fought a huge war. Hundreds of thousands of people died for this. And in reality, if we're being honest, and this is my problem with our opponents, is that they're so constantly dishonest, is our founders set in motion principles that ended up undoing slavery. They knew that they couldn't solve it at the beginning of the country. They needed to be united all against Great Britain. I mean, can you imagine if all those slave colonies were, against the United States? We never would have won. We would still be British colonies. But they were so smart that we outsmarted the slaveholders by instilling principles into our founding documents and into the people that ended up not just undoing slavery, but ended up leading to civil rights. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. is being erased from these critical race theory proponents in the history books because he liked the American founding. He spoke to the American people and talked about how civil rights were actually a continuation of the founding principles that all men are created equal. And that's why Martin Luther King Jr. is so American. That's why we revere him and have a whole day to him, is because he was American.
Well, not only that, but what was his dream? His dream is that his children would be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Exactly the opposite of critical race theory teaches you, that the color of your skin is the primary determinant of who you are, and that you can look at somebody and you should be able to judge who they are and who their family is on the basis of external characteristics which they have no control over. And one thing that is very interesting, if you look at a human brain and you look at an animal brain, let's say a dog, the animal brain will have a much more developed midbrain because that's the part that allows you to react. And animals react very quickly compared to human beings. Okay. But you look at the human brain, and it has a much better developed frontal lobe, frontal cortex, where you engage in rational thought processing, where you have the ability to extract information from the past and the present, to analyze it, and to project it into the future. So what they're teaching us and teaching our children is to act more like an animal. Don't take advantage of the fact that you were made in the image of God and you have these amazing cerebral capacities. Just act like an animal.
Yeah. Wow, that I did not know that. That is an incredible, and of course you're the brain surgeon, so you're going to know that. That is incredible. I know that we do this in schools, right? You know, we for the past 30 years. Well, 30 years ago, we started this debate about public schools and whether or not they should be teaching sex education and safe sex practices. And the left argued, or I'm sorry, the proponents of sex education in public schools argued, well, kids are doing it anyway, so let's at least show them how to do it safely. And now you fast forward and it's like being applied to all these other really gross and weird things. But that you're exactly right. They want us to, they tell young men, they've told young men for the past 30 years, you can't control yourself when it comes to sex. You're an animal and you have instincts and you have needs and you have to do it. Well, and then they complain about a rape culture. I teach my young boys, I teach them, I said, not only should you control yourself when it comes to sex, you must control yourself when it comes to sex. But yeah, no, they want to turn us into animals. That's such a great point. More people need to know that brain analogy. That's a great example.
Well, it's critical also that we explain things to our kids. You know, when my kids were growing up, unlike some people of faith, I didn't say you can't watch movies on television. I did say if you're going to watch a movie on TV, we need to watch it together, so that I could then explain. We could talk about it. So when you saw all the sexual promiscuity, they need somebody to put that into perspective for them, because you can't hide them from it. Right. You know, they're going to go off to college. They're going to go. So you cannot hide them from it for the rest of their lives. It just doesn't work that way. So they have to be able to put things in context and understand them. I remember my oldest son. He went to Yale, and his first girlfriend there. And she was a very accomplished, beautiful young lady. One of the Cosmopolitan, one of the magazines had her as one of the 10 most eligible bachelorettes in the country. But she was not a good person. And she ridiculed my son, and her friends ridiculed him because he believed that you shouldn't have sex until you're married. And, I'm glad he got rid of her. And he's been married for 10 years to a wonderful young lady now. But, you have to give your kids those kinds of solid principles, because they're going to be under such intense pressure out there in the world. And if you haven't really sat down and explained these things to them that they're seeing on television, God have mercy. I had an opportunity, my wife and I, we were down in Lee County, Florida, not too long ago, and they were showing us some of the books that the little children are reading. For the kindergarten and pre-K, it was a book about worms and how these worms could go in either direction. They could be male or they could be female. Planting the seed, fertilizing the ground for all this transgender stuff. And then we saw some of the books that the elementary schools were using. There was frank pornography in those books. Yep. Unbelievable, that the stuff that they're planting into the brains of our children. And I'll tell you something about the human brain. It remembers everything you've ever seen, everything you've ever heard. It never goes away. And those subconscious influences will have a profound effect on who you are and what you believe as time goes on.
Wow, that is incredible. Yeah, and I think that's, I've seen that book about worms and how they can go either way with their gender and all of that. And it's, for me, it's enraging, not because it's enraging because they're teaching my kids that they can change gender, but you're comparing human beings to worms. Yeah. Like, they're so anti-human. I don't want to get too religious, but a lot of Christians forget that the devil became the devil. He was an angel of light. He was in charge of all the music in heaven. But when he broke away from God, he rebelled against God. When God told him that he was going to create man and that the angels would serve man, and the devil thought no way, these are animals. I'm not going to serve disgusting animals. And you see this actually play out on the left with in so many different areas. They're comparing us to worms. Think
Yeah.
about, I mean, I would never compare anyone that I respected to a worm. We are not worms. We are human beings. We can think rationally. We are called to a higher life. We are called actually to self-sacrifice. You know, and I want to say something. You pointed out that your son went to Yale. An amazing woman your mother was. I mean, she put in all of this hard work, had a son that became a rocket scientist and a brain surgeon, and then her grandkids are going to Yale. None of that would have happened if she had had an abortion or lived for her life or lived for herself and not her family, her God, and her country. It's just, I just want to tell you, like,
Absolutely.
I have chills down my spine right now. It's so beautiful, and that's
Right.
what God made. That's what's great about this country, and that is what's beautiful about the family is
Mhm.
love is sacrifice, right? You hear the left say all the time, love is love, love is love. No, love is not love. I don't love pizza the same way I love my family. Love is sacrifice. Love is dying to yourself for those that you actually love. Love is storming the beaches at Normandy, right? Love is working from 5 a.m. to 12 a.m. at night so that your kids can have a decent life and have food on the
Mhm.
table. That is what love is. Love is sacrifice, it's pain, and it's all directed towards offering things up so that the people around you
Absolutely.
that you actually do love can have a good life and live well.
And recognizing that, we have something here in America that doesn't exist anywhere else, and that is opportunity. Uh, Equal opportunity. You can achieve enormous things in this country if you're willing to work hard and you're dedicated. And even when I was a kid, there were so many people saying, you can't really make it. Society is racist, it's against you. My mother would never allow us to engage in those kind of thoughts. The first thing out of her mind, out of her mouth, whenever you had an excuse, was a poem called Yourself to Blame. And I didn't want to hear that poem, so I stopped making excuses.
Mhm.
But, teaching people to take personal responsibility for what happened. Because if you can blame it on somebody else, then you don't have to fix it. You don't have to do anything in your own life. You don't have to make improvements. You can
Right.
just sit there and wallow in self-pity. And of course, when you say that to the left, they get very angry. No, no, it's your fault. It's because, and this whole systemic racism beat that they're on. When they love to use that because then they don't have to give specific examples.
Mhm.
You
Well,
say, prove
one,
an example. No, no, it's just systemic. It's all over.
yeah, that's right. When I was first learning about critical race theory and what was being taught in schools, you learn about how they're teaching kids that the white people are the oppressors and everyone else is the oppressed. And my wife said, she said, wives are so smart, moms are so smart. They're so wise, they know more about humanity than I think anyone else. But my wife actually said to me, she said, Terry, I actually think I'd be more upset if they were teaching my kids that they were oppressed and that they were stuck in a system that was rigged that they could never overcome.
Yeah.
Because, at least if they're teaching your kids that they're bad and that they're oppressors and that they're hurting other people, you're still teaching them that you can do anything you want. Right. It's not keeping those people back. In fact, it's saying, well, you can get away with oppressing people because that's the law. That's the system in this country. But it's
That's a,
keeping all those other kids back and taking away hope and dreams and aspirations from them. It's totally terrible. I agree with her.
well, having the right attitude. And she used to also say to us, if you go into an auditorium full of racist white people, she said, you don't have a problem. They have a problem
Yeah,
because
that's
they're
right.
all going to cringe and wonder if you're going to sit next to them, whereas you can go sit anywhere you want.
I love it. I love it. Just go right to the front. That's great.
And
Oh, moms are wise. They're so wise.
that's why the good Lord gave them to us. And but the other really pressing issue that's going on, I think, right now is religious suppression.
Mhm.
There was throughout the COVID shutdown, there seemed to be a particular emphasis on churches, church congregations, which is still having an impact, even though a lot of the restrictions have been lifted. Uh, People have gotten used to Zooming church now, and some not going at all. So it's going to take a while to get through that. But even of more concern than that is there are a lot of people who have real convictions about vaccines because the cell lines that were used to do the research were from aborted fetuses. And they just have an ethical concern about that. And we've reached a point now where our government just brushes aside their ethical and religious concerns. And if that's going to be the case with vaccines, it'll be the case with a lot of other things too. And that's one of the reasons that we have to continue to fight for the Constitution. I think the people who put that thing together were inspired by God. And they really understood that the tendency of government is to grow, to infiltrate, and to control. All governments do that. And that's why they gave us this Constitution, to control the tendency of the government to take control of our lives, because America was a great experiment. Was it possible to have a country that was people-centric and not government-centric? That experiment is still ongoing, and we perhaps have the severest challenge to it right now.
No, we have a huge crisis. I think that if you look at the history of America, we have basically refounded the country several times. When we first were started, we had the Articles of Confederation, and those ended up failing. So we had to refound the country, establish the Constitution that we have now. And then, slavery is going on, and then Lincoln comes around with the Civil War and refounds it. I think that we're at a similar point right now in American history, where we have an opportunity to refound the country. And I think it's going to go one way or the other. And I know that if you look at all of our cultural institutions, it looks as if the left is winning. And in a lot of ways they have. They've taken over almost all of our institutions. I mean, the Department of Justice is declaring these parents to be domestic terrorists. But that said, all of these institutions are only as powerful as we make them. They're only as credible as we give them credit. And so I think that there's going to be a real opportunity to refound the country in a way that is fulfilling American principles, right? And fulfilling the ideals of self-government and government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But we have to fight. We have to get educated. We have to learn about all these threats. That's one of the main things that I try and do with my work at American Principles Project, is educate these families and Americans about the threats that are coming at them. A lot of people don't even realize, we talked a little bit about the transgender stuff. They don't realize that there's a direct tie to big pharma. Transgenderism, it's only like, I think 0.3% of the population, but they're on every major TV show. They're on every major nightly news. It's in every newspaper, thousands of stories. So why is 0.3% of the population doing this? It's because big pharma is making a ton of money off of this. And so we have to educate Americans about all of these threats and everything that's going on and how to address it. And that's why I'm really excited about, working with Cornerstone and all of you guys as well, because you guys understand that the family is the cornerstone of this country. Absolutely. And
well, that's why we wanted to have you on. And we look forward to continued work with you. So proud of what you're doing. Proud of the fact that you represent something that we really need, which is going to be crucial, and that is courage. Because, a lot of times we sing our national anthem, and when we get to the end of that first stanza, it says, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Well, you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave. You gotta be willing to stand up for what you believe in. And as Ronald Reagan said, our freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And we're the ones who are going to be the ones, God willing, who will prevent that extinction of our freedoms. So Terry, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you and your organization for what you're doing to encourage people, to educate people, and to be a prime example of the courage that will make us one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Carson. This has been a blast. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. All right, it's a wrap.
That was so great. I haven't had a conversation like that, like in real life, for a long time. So I really appreciate this. This is Andy. Thanks for making this happen. This is great.
Yeah, that was great. Great job, Dr. Carson.
It was better than when we have a moderator.
So Terry, we're gonna Dr. Carson, probably it'll be in either February or March, but he's coming out with a podcast, and these Cornerstone Convos will they'll basically become a podcast. We'll record them from a video perspective still, but we're really excited about it, and we'll get this and edit it, put our logo on it and stuff, and then we'll blast it out on social media and tag y'all and just keep going.
Yeah, we'll promote this too. So we started the Big Family this summer, Dr. Carson, and it's like, you got big pharma, big oil,
right,
big tech, and we're creating Big Family, and we've got 9,700 members now, and so we'll blast that out to all of them, and they share the stuff, and but we'll promote the heck out of this. I'm really, really excited about it.
And then so eventually, Terry is a pizza connoisseur, and he has a place is it in Alexandria, Terry?
So it's actually it's in Iowa. It's in
Okay.
the Quad Cities. So if you run for president again, we can get you in there spinning pizzas and everything.
All right, I'll keep that in mind. All right,
It'll be a lot of fun.
Well, thanks, and please give your wife and your kids our regards too.
I will. You tell Candy I said hi too.
I will. All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
See ya.